Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. Many thanks as always for tuning in. News just broke today that David Price versus Alexander Povetkin is confirmed. Numerous media outlets have confirmed the fight. I'm quoting from an article on BBC Sport. Anthony Joshua versus Joseph Parker. David Price is to fight Alexander Povetkin on the undercard. Former British heavyweight champ David Price says he has a massive chance when he fights Alexander Povetkin on the Anthony Joshua undercard in March. He admits it is a big ask to win the bout, but added that upsets do happen. Russia's Povetkin, 38, has lost just once in his 34-fight career against Vladimir Klitschko in 2013. So this video is to obviously react to this piece of news. The second part of the video is going to be discussing the fight itself. Firstly, let me just say this is one I got wrong. This is one I got badly wrong. I didn't think this fight would happen. I didn't think a guy like Alexander Povetkin, who had such powerful backers and who had earned so much money in his career to date, would be interested in travelling to the UK, away from home, not his normal thing to do, to fight on an undercard for undercard money. But the fight is being made. You know, perhaps that says just what sort of state David Price's career and resume is in at the minute, that Alexander Povetkin kind of sees him as enough of a risk to come over to the UK. You know, obviously he views him as a very small risk, or else he probably wouldn't be doing it. Povetkin, I believe, is the WBA #1 contender, although I may have got that governing body wrong. And he is in a #1 contender position to fight Anthony Joshua in a future fight. So clearly the roads are starting to lead to that matchup, with Povetkin looking to get UK exposure and looking to fight on the same bill as Anthony Joshua to increase the hype and increase the talk for this fight. You know, a lot of skeptics will be thinking that the way of building Alexander Povetkin and the way of him making him look like a very, very formidable opponent and selling loads of future pay-per-views is to have him lay out David Price on an AJ undercard when all the AJ fans are tuning in. And these fans who maybe haven't heard or seen of Povetkin before will then think that he's you know, a real formidable test for Joshua, and will therefore drive sales for that fight. Anyway, let's talk about how I see the fight. You know, the first thing people talk about when they talk about David Price is the power. David Price, you would think, always has the classic heavyweight puncher's chance. Although in recent fights, particularly his return fight against Sokolowski, I speculated on this channel that I think the idea of David Price having that puncher's chance in the big fights is almost a bit of a myth. I mean, he actually went the distance with Sokolowski in that fight, and he looked very, very shy, very timid, and actually afraid of taking the necessary risks to get powerful punches off. And that's something he's going to need to do against Alexander Povetkin, because I think his only chance of winning this fight is landing that big right hand on Povetkin and hoping to wipe him out. My concern looking at Price is he's got to the point where he's so psychologically damaged from all his defeats, and he's so tentative and he's so nervous in there, that he's actually not putting himself in the right positions. He's actually not throwing the right punches to even give himself a puncher's chance in the fight. And I think that's the key question going into this. You know, people will talk about David Price's knockout power, but is he going to land those punches on Povetkin? Is he going to throw those punches against Povetkin to even give himself a chance in the fight? You know, big test. Price is kind of in a position where he doesn't have too much to lose. You know, his credibility's probably at an all-time low. You know, he was knocked out by Christian Hamer, looked pretty average in his comeback against Sokolowski. There probably aren't too many huge money-making opportunities available to David Price. So, you know, taking this fight, you've got to say it's a lot of heart to him. Fair play for taking such a big risk. But you kind of wonder if it's at a point in time where he is maybe just gambling because there's no other sensible move. You know, I said before, Price could certainly fit into the mix of the Dave Allens, the Ian Lewisons, the Gary Cornises. He could maybe be an opponent for the likes of a Dubois, you know, or Joe Joyce. But clearly he wants more for himself than that, and he's prepared to take a gamble and take a risk against Alexander Povetkin in order to strive to it. And look, this is heavyweight boxing. One punch can, you know, change everything. If David Price lands that right hand on Alexander Povetkin, if he wipes out Alexander Povetkin, he probably does put himself in a great position to fight Joshua. Yeah, if he lands that right hand on Joshua, knocks out Joshua, he probably puts himself in a position to be fighting Deontay Wilder to be, you know, a unified heavyweight champion a Hall of Fame fighter, a pound for pound top level fighter, you know, and what I'm getting at is this is heavyweight boxing. You never know what's going to happen, and Price is 3 or 4 right hands away from being unified, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen. I'm just saying I can see from Price's perspective why he is at least inclined to take the risk, and why this route offers the opportunity for fame, fortune, glory, whereas fighting at English level, area title level, even British level, probably is less exciting in terms of the potential. In terms of what chance I give David Price, I would say Alexander Povetkin is the worst possible style for a guy like David Price. David Price is okay if someone stands off him. You know, if someone backs away from him, he can use his size, he can try and get that awful jab out, he can try and find the openings to throw his right hand. If someone comes in, gets inside the pocket, sits in his chest, he panics. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have the footwork or the speed to get out of there. And he resorts to, you know, desperate tactics. We've seen that when fighters are able to push the pace on him, his gas tank empties pretty swiftly. And we've also seen really that he kind of runs out of ideas very, very swiftly when he's put in that position. Both the Tony Thompson 2 fight and the Christian Hamer fight kind of reinforce that. Alexander Povetkin is also known as a ferocious puncher. 33 wins with 23 by knockout. But who can forget the chilling KOs against the likes of Johan de Par, Mike Perez, Carlos Takam, Manuel Char. You know, a very, 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 very heavy-handed guy. Recently, the knockouts have somewhat dried up, and in fact, Povetkin's last 2 wins have been by unanimous decision. Now, conspiracy theorists will speculate, and there probably is some logic to this speculation, that those devastating streak of KOs have dried up subsequent to Povetkin's more recent performance-enhancing drug controversy. And the speculation is that the devastating streak of knockouts he was enjoying was possibly a result of various substances that were in his body. And now that they have been found out, and now that presumably he's no longer on such substances, the knockouts have ceased. That may be the case, but I'm convinced that Alexander Povetkin has enough power to hurt David Price. I mean, Alexander Povetkin, for me, you'd have to say has more power than the likes of a Tony Thompson or a Christian Hamer, you know, and those guys hurt David Price. But I do believe Alexander Povetkin is perhaps less of a threat in general than he was 2 or 3 years ago. You know, a guy like Christian Hamer wouldn't have gone the distance against Povetkin back in 2014 and 2015 when he was taking out Carlos Takam, Perez, Manuel Char with single punch knockouts. Povetkin came up short against Vladimir Klitschko. He showed an extremely good chin in that fight. He was hurt and dropped probably 5 or 6 times by Vladimir Klitschko, but he kept coming, he kept pushing the pace, you know, and he didn't allow himself to get stopped at any point. So, you know, whilst David Price does have a big right hand, Vladimir Klitschko couldn't get Povetkin out of there whilst landing every shot in the book against him. So it's not as simple as David Price needs only, you know, to clip Povetkin once and it's game over. Price does have that sort of power that can change the course of a fight, but there's reason to believe Povetkin is very, very durable. So, you know, Price is probably going to have to look for more success than landing one Hail Mary punch over the course of the fight. Yeah, people do speculate that Vladimir Klitschko was similar dimensions to David Price, and, you know, he was able to cause Povetkin problems. But the differences there are just vast. You know, Vladimir Klitschko has one of the best jabs in heavyweight history, in my opinion. David Price probably has one of the worst jabs in heavyweight history. Povetkin won't have the same problems getting inside on Price than he did getting inside of Klitschko's jab. Klitschko, you can call it unsportsmanlike, you can call it a bad look for boxing. He pulled off a display of holding in that fight that completely negated Povetkin's work when he got into the positions he wanted to. Based on everything we've seen from David Price in his career to date, we must say it is unlikely that Price is going to be able to negate and stifle Povetkin's work to anything like the same extent. So I think this is a very bad style matchup for Price. You know, I think he's most vulnerable to guys who close down the gap, most vulnerable to guys who are big punchers and most vulnerable to guys who look to get inside his jab. And I don't think he has any of the tools. I don't think he has the speed, the movement, the inside game, the defence, the jab to keep a guy like Povetkin off him. So I think it's a bad look for David Price, this. Does he have a puncher's chance? Sort of. But he didn't even throw the right punches in his last fight to create that opportunity. He's got nothing to lose. He may as well throw that big right hand and hope for the best. But he's a tentative, timid fighter. And he's got every reason to be tentative and timid against Alexander Povetkin, who not only is the biggest test he's been in with, but the biggest puncher he's been in with. I think it's a bad look for David Price. I make him a 20-1 underdog in the fight, to be frank. And you know, it'd be very, very, very interesting to see if there's any people in boxing who really give him too much of a chance going into this matchup. I think it's an intriguing fight. David Price is a guy who has a big following, and whenever he boxes, people are intrigued to watch him fight. Povetkin is a ferocious puncher who's had a lot of controversy attached to his name. So I think it's an intriguing fight, and it's a fight that will generate interest. But it's a fight that is, you know, very, very hard to make a case for David Price, in my humble opinion. A lot of people will be very down on the fight, saying that it's legalised murder by letting Povetkin step in the ring with Price. You know, I'm someone who always believes that Price is someone of his full senses. He's a pro boxer with a licence. If he wants to take this risk and if the opportunity is available to him, he's entitled to have the opportunity for that attempt at glory. He's also entitled to go and earn the money that he'll be earning. So I don't have a problem with the fight being put on. Both guys want it, but I would hate to see David Price be injured, and I suspect there's a high probability the fight will end in a devastating knockout. I'm just looking as we're talking. Bet365 of Povetkin 1-25 on, 10-1 on David Price. You can get 11-1 with Marathon Bet on the Price upset. Those odds, I must admit, don't interest me. You know, I'd be wanting a lot more than 11-1 on David Price to beat Alexander Povetkin. You know, I think it's a tough ask, and fundamentally, if they fought 15 times, I think you could probably pick Povetkin to win every single one. But, you know, the market's still forming, so we'll see if those prices update. Anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on this fight. Making it hard for David Price, but nevertheless an intriguing fight, and one that, despite watching through my fingers, I will, of course, be glued to, and I'm sure many of you will be as well. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be sure to cover this fight again in the lead up. Hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed the content. Leave your comments in the section below. Give me your take on this matchup. Do you give Price any shout at all? Many thanks as always for tuning in. Appreciate the support, guys.